So yes, Dr. Mike Brass, long title, just Head of Security Services. All that means is I'm in charge of the governance, risk and compliance function within National Highways. Also the enterprise security architecture function, which is not a technical function. It helps set the standards and processes by which National Highways operates. Underneath, I've got a multidisciplinary background, so I'm at University College London at the Institute of Archaeology, where my doctorate's actually from. And excuse the promo, that's a book that I actually released recently, with a disclaimer, of course, that this is not endorsed by National Highways or published by National Highways. And if anyone's interested, I've actually got a few copies, and that's so see me afterwards. This particular slide is just to illustrate this digital transformation that National Highways is going through, like any other organization at this moment in time. And this is just how we linking it together. We're looking at capabilities, we're looking at alignment, we're looking at the value streams in each of the areas, not only within digital services, but within National Highways more widely. And that means we have to do this cross-cutting view and start aligning our practices, our internal processes, and the means by which we want to enhance the maturity of different areas of National Highways and how we've got to bring it together. And in order to do this, we started looking at how can we as a security function actually operate with the business. So it's not about all the technicalities that go on inside, it's how do we engage with the entire organization. What is our purpose? What's our objectives, the outcomes, the approaches through governance, enterprise risk management? What are the opportunities? What are the risks? How do we actually all start bringing this together? And excuse me, because I've only got a few minutes of talking before I need to hand over, so these are a few slides, but I'm happy to go through it in more detail in the Q&A. So the scope of it, this is just a refined bit of the previous slide, looking at, so the security within National Highways is both cyber for the digital, it is personnel, it's physical, it's safety. We bring all of this together. And the slide is also mentioning things like supply chain security, data, systems, infrastructure, and how we actually are governed within the directorate, how we govern ourselves, and how do we deliver the services that we have on offer. And we do this through a concept that is called DARA, which is direct, assure, respond, and advise. This isn't something that is security industry standard, but we decided to break it up and to have it quite nice and easy. So the direct is about business planning, it's about the strategy, it's governance, it's standards, it's policies. The advise is how do we do risk assessments, how do we do that advisory support, how do we do identity and access management, how do we do safety, how do we introduce guardrails throughout the organization. The respond bit is the usual, it's your bit of the technical side, it's your security operations center, it's incident coordination across all areas, personnel, physical, what happens on the roadside. And the assurance, these are exercises that we conduct towards enhancing the organizational resilience and the resilience of all the services that we offer, both for our customers, whether it's rail, whether it's the person just wanting to get from A to B using a tarmac, ultimately. And so there's another reason for mentioning this slide, which I'll go on to in a moment. So we've got the operating methodology, we've got domains, we've got the protection, we've got the assets, and how we actually bring this together to offer all the services that we do. And so it's the usual cliche, it's a shared responsibility, but what does this actually mean? So we break it down for our National Highways colleagues as to who in the entire organization is responsible, accountable, consulted, informed, in order to make everybody understand. We don't operate in our silos. It's not sitting out there in your mommy's basement doing various little bits and things. So what does this actually mean for the transport sector and how we operate in terms of the business impacts? So what we lacked to some extent was a security controls framework, and by that, this is what I'm referring to by the guardrails in which projects can operate, programs can operate. So I'm thinking of NERTS 3, the national multi-million, this is over £500 million worth of technological refresh, the technology along the side of the roads. How do we put all of those guardrails in place for medium, high, and low complexity projects? And so I decided to try and take this back to square one. So I went with a framework that our suppliers actually understand. It's from the NCSC. And I went, what does partially achieved and fully achieved mean against those outcomes? It's entirely outcomes based. And I put together those particular lists of controls, and so it becomes a very different conversation. It's not National Highways prescribing X or Y. It's not National Highways acting as a department of no. It is, these are the outcome expectations that we are meeting. How do you go about achieving it is the next conversation. And so that is, we say to the suppliers, here's what we want, come back to us with the proposals. We engage then with those conversations. That then impacts what the business strategy is for those particular programs. And on NERTS 3, it meant that we had a huge impact upon the timetable of the delivery and the mechanisms thereof of the delivery. So I mentioned we work with version 1, Talent, and quite a few others. This also aligns with the government Secure by Design entire framework, so we start bringing this together as a holistic whole. And in terms of Secure by Design, these are just some of the principles that the government is mentioning, and these are what we take and actually ensure that the project or program that we're engaged with can actually deliver it. And it just helps a smoother process of that particular delivery, instead of just letting people guess it's haphazard, and then a few years down the line something major happens. I'm not going to mention, it's been in the news. At that point, just want to hand over to Dimitri.
Thank you, Mike. So I'm Dimitri. I'm an associate partner at PA Consulting, leading the asset management transformation pillar that we have in the transport sector. I help transport organizations like National Highways modernize, to become more efficient, to become more resilient, in order to implement ways of working that actually work even when things don't go to plan, which around security, as you can imagine, does happen often. It happens often in the transport sector as well. I would like to share how we helped Mike and National Highways to operationalize the Security by Design as a concept, from something that it is a conceptual framework to something that actually works on a day-to-day basis. And hopefully I will share some lessons that you can borrow in your own organizations and make sure that some of the things we have learned expedite the process for becoming more secure. National Highways is worth noting, building on Mike's point, that is digitizing fast. So you have the roadside technology, you have the tunnels control systems, you have the data services, information that we all use as road users. The systems are becoming more connected. This brings benefits, but there is also a catch. And the catch is that when a small mistake happens in the wider ecosystem, as part of the wider jigsaw, you have a problem, a big problem across everything. So what we have learned and what has been our kind of mantra at National Highways in this particular work is that we need to always start with the boring things first. Fix the boring stuff first, and then all the rest will follow. Unlike what we see in the movies, in Netflix, where security problems typically start with a big drama, actually we have found that small things like a shared passport or a forgotten part of one of the processes or a supplier who hasn't been removed from the system on a time after their contract, those small things can have big implications. So this is what we did. So we looked into 3 key areas: governance and assurance, alongside the security control framework that Mike talked about. And we changed small things. We clarified the roles and responsibilities so everybody knows what happens at enterprise level, what happens at project level, what happens at operations. We also brought assurance earlier in the process. We brought it upstream. So next time a procurement is happening, the contracts have from day one all the right requirements in place from a security perspective. So you don't have to retrospectively fit them in, which costs money and causes painful process across all parties. And last but not least, in the governance and assurance, we demonstrated the progress we are making with clear evidence in plain English that senior leaders could understand without requiring a technical translator. It's funny because one of the projects that I was leading at National Highways, even before working with Mike in the security space, we needed to have one of the decisions to be made around security, and the decision was bumping from one person to another, from the data owner to the system owner to the service owner, security. We came in straight away to have a race, put a race in place, 1 page, 4 boxes. Everybody was clearer on what needs to happen and who is making the decisions. We moved from having decisions floating around to having decisions made in 1 or 2 days. The second area that we looked at was the whole life cycle of a service, from concept to design, build, procurement, and so on and so on. And there were key things that we introduced. So, for example, playbooks. So the project manager or the service owner or the data owner all have clear roles and responsibilities and know what they are expected from them from a security perspective. We also put requirements in contracts from day one. And we also have clearly defined standard patterns that engineers and suppliers could understand in terms of what good looks like. The benefit of that was one of the programs was, I recall, going back and forth between the design team and the security team about the security review. 5, 6, 7, 8 times. It was a painful loop for everyone. So what we tried to do, we brought assurance and security people early on in the stage of procurement. So things as part of the procurement, as part of the design, were considered with security in mind. So everything was built safe from the start, rather than having to retrospectively fit those things. And last but not least, the people, capability and confidence. What was important was we wanted people to feel confident when they are using the services, the systems, and the road users when they are paying at the recipient end. To do so, we did joint exercises not only with the National Highways, but their supply chain. And we uncovered a number of things. You pick up a number of skeletons, if you like, when it comes to doing the exercises. And we found small things though that could have big impact. A delay in having somebody in joiner movers levers process of the system. And these small things aggregated change significantly how security is considered, not just in the digital services space, but in the wider organizations. So what has changed? We are seeing more consistent delivery when it comes to projects and services on how they are delivered. We are seeing fewer surprises in the wider ecosystem. And we have clear expectations, so everybody knows from the outset what they need to be delivering. What is really interesting, and I'm sure we'll discuss this as part of the fireside chat, is that you don't need to be a cybersecurity expert to implement many of those things. Majority of those things we have done were not technical. It was about people, processes, and using common sense. So key takeaways is to use small things, to fix the boring stuff first, and the rest will follow. Thank you.
Thank you. So if there are any questions from the floor, we will take those in a second. Just raise your hand and we've got a microphone that we can lend you. But in the meantime, there are a few questions that we wanted to put to both Mike and Dimitri, and you can fight between yourselves as who wants to go first or answer the question. The first of which was, obviously we've narrowed the conversation to National Highways, but if you were expanding it to transport as a whole, what, in your opinion, does security by design mean for the whole industry as a whole? Is Is it something that you think they're already well versed with, or something that you think needs to be taken more seriously or looked at slightly differently? What are your thoughts?
I'll take that. Secure by design, in my view, is very simple. It's just security done right, and it's security done at the outset. It's nothing more and it's nothing less than that. I think you will struggle to find an information security specialist who doesn't understand that and who doesn't want to do the work. The real key on this, and where the government is given its guidance, is how do you make sure you get that embedded right at the very start of the particular program. So this isn't, again, it isn't a technical kind of framework. And although the government is aiming it within its own departments at a project level, to me it's nothing more than a framework, and it's a framework to get embedded at the enterprise governance level. The moment you get it in there at pre-stage, what I call pre-stage gate 0, right at the thinking stage, is the moment you win. And then you can have it at different other points, and you can have specifications thereof. So to me, this is simply coming down to a matter of the stakeholder influence and the governance at the different organizations.
Okay.
And I would add, it's not necessarily something new. So security is considered across different parts of the process. What is the key difference here is that you consider it from the outset in the way you build a car with seat belts straight away when you design it, rather than after a car accident, or you fit smoke alarms in the building when you fit out the building rather than after a fire. So this logic is what security by design tries to apply. Change what you have already been considering in order to have the maximum effectiveness.
And if you were working for organisation, or your view of organisations, do they see it that way? Or do they see it as a necessary evil or an overhead? How is it perceived in organisations, and how should they be perceiving it?
You can always have a perception at the entire national executive level that effectively security is trying to hinder the delivery of a particular program or project. At least at National Highways, the person who's the executive from our directorate, the number one priority in terms of the RIS3 funding is security. And he's made it a priority at the national executive level. And a recent particular event, which I'm not going to say the name of again, but it was in the news, has made sure it's at the forefront of the national executive mind. And the question becomes, how do we actually stop this from happening again? And what are the opportunities as well? Can the embedded of security practices open up? By doing this right at the very outset, by designing the systems and services correctly at the outset, by making sure there is a joined-up approach, and that digital services are not operating in isolation, by also having a joined-up approach between data, and National Highways' data is currently valued at £68 billion. So how can you bring this all together in a holistic picture that is of value for the organization? And likewise, that can apply. These principles can apply to any organization.
The last couple of years, I think incidents that have happened across different organizations are changing the mindset and the culture around this as well. It's worth considering major incidents have been on the news in the public domain, like Jaguar Land Rover and others, that have suffered retrospectively of incidents. And I think this is changing the minds of organizations where they do understand that getting security by design clear in the outset, in the beginning of when you have a new service, when you have a new system, it can save you a lot of money and spend later on.
Yeah. You mentioned something when you were stood up there, and I confess I'm in that category of when you talk security, you're thinking when everything blows up and Bruce Willis comes into town to resolve everything, that's when security goes wrong. But you mentioned it's usually about the smaller things that you look at. Can you kind of cite some examples, not necessarily in the transport industry, but in general, where had security being thought through properly, that smaller problems couldn't have escalated into bigger ones? Because I hear you, but I'm struggling to picture it.
It's very interesting, because it is true that we always think about security and the cyber security. You think about all these big control rooms in place and or the Netflix kind of drama that you would have with that. It is not true. It's actually the boring stuff that hit you in the system, and simple things like the password, for example, and shared password that has been compromised. Or it could be other things. For example, the way many organizations work is through supply chain. They have a number of contractors in place. The way you onboard and offboard, through the joiner, mover, levers process in any organization can be critical, because even a small delay on getting somebody off your systems can give the opportunity to the attackers to hijack.
I mean, I've hogged the limelight so far. Any other questions from the floor that I've missed, please? I'm scanning the horizon. No, good, I can keep going. I've got loads. No, I haven't. I'll stick to time. The future. I mean, every other area so far has mentioned AI, the threats from abroad, and so on and so forth. Are we in a good place now? Or we assume we're in a good place now. What about the very near future? Are you constantly looking over the horizon at what next? You can't point at each other. One of you's
so I think you wouldn't be able to predict the future by no means, right? But you can exercise different scenarios and rehearse. What I usually call practice before the match, before things happen, because things will happen eventually, and how you recover from the instance in the most effective way is what differentiates different organizations suffering for years, if not longer, from the cybersecurity or non-cyber instance. So I think considering different scenarios, considering how the different areas of future will play out, and exercising with within the organization, with the supply chain, with the wider ecosystem is key. There's also something around openness and readiness, which I think supply chain, working with the National Highways and other organizations, need to consider. How open and transparent you are about the approach you take with evolving technologies like AI. It is important to consider that when organizations are engaging, there is a magic glue that needs to happen for everything to sync and work perfectly. So using this kind of rehearsal and practice approach for what could happen is, I think, the best way for organizations to be ready for that.
But isn't that quite difficult, because if you don't know what the outcome is, to kind of predict it? Is it more, if that went wrong, we've been in trouble, as opposed to how it goes wrong?
The big difference that we saw at National Highways through the wargaming and exercising program was that people felt much confident, no matter what was thrown to them, to recover from this faster, quicker, more effective. So you build this kind of muscle in your organization. And the most important thing from the recent incidents that happened outside is build this muscle internally, but also with your supply chain.
Understood. And Mike, you said, picking up something that you said, I took a note where you said you don't need to be a cyber expert, you just need to have processes. But surely somebody in the organization needs to have that at the forefront.
You've got the SMEs, you've got the subject matter experts.
Yeah.
But you've also got a diversity of subject matter experts in terms of what their own background is. We've got people who have come from law, from medical profession, me from the social sciences, and so it goes on and on and on. How do you bring that cross-collaboration and those cross-skill sets to bear? Just to go back to the question that was asked, and Dimitri answered, yes, I could go into AI assurance frameworks, data, and all of that particular paraphernalia. But on two of those matters, I'll go back to NERTS, the National Roadside Telephony Service, which it's the entire physical backbone, including signs and signals and all of that it runs over. So there had been a big program of work previously called NERTS 2 that had security requirements. Then when the security function within National Highways was highly limited, the outcomes that were intended were absolutely correct, particularly for that point in time. And the intended outcomes very much marry with the intended outcomes for NERTS 3, but obviously given that the horizon is substantially different now than what it was 7, 8 years ago, it becomes another question of how do we actually implement it, how do we tighten this up, what does it mean, and how does it influence a particular business strategy. Another question that I'm very much grappling with is, I mentioned data's value of £68 billion. They are doing a re-evaluation, and I'm fully expecting that to go up at this point in time. What is the value of security? How do you use the types of methodology that they are using, if, in effect, Infonomics, and recalculate what the value of security is, which takes it beyond the usual? What is the opportunities? What is the risk reduction? How much do you potentially save an organization? What does it mean if an incident happens, as opposed to actually doing the activities correctly? And then 3 years down the line, the organization turns on and says, well, nothing happened, so reduce your budget. What is that particular value of security? How do you demonstrate it in ways and means that economists, that the executives actually understand? And I do believe that there is a new way that we could go about this, but I'm just exploring that thinking. And when I look back and I see the way data Infonomics has actually progressed, particularly in the last decade, I think information security is going to play catch up to that, and we'll have to start factoring that type of cross-disciplinary thinking in.
Thank you. Any final thoughts, Dimitri, from you? Or
I think the key takeaways for other organizations would be to do simple things like the exercises I mentioned, communicating how you protect your users and your employees when it comes to security, and take a small action, get a security by design related checkpoint in your next procurement.
Okay, fantastic. And this is my final Graham Norton moment. Your book. What was it entitled and what's it about in 12 seconds?
It's on governance, risk and compliance in an organization, and data privacy, with a social science aspect on how to use a multidisciplinary perspective for the benefit of the organization.
A round of applause for Dimitri, a round of applause for Mike. Thank you very much.